The emergency room doors exploded inward like a breach under floodlights. Paramedics barreled through with a gurney, leaving behind them a trail of blood so thick and steady it looked like a war zone dragged into fluorescent light. The man strapped to that gurney wasn't just wounded, he was wrecked. His flank was torn open, ribs groaning with each shallow breath. Combat gear hung in shreds where trauma shears had cut through Kevlar and flesh alike, saving neither time nor dignity. His face was pale beneath desert dust, and dried blood jaws clenched so tight it could crack teeth. 20 doctors closed in at once. Prep trauma bay, 3 move. We need sedation, chest imaging, compressions ready. Get a central line, 2 units O negative, push fluids now. Their voices crashed over each other like waves against rocks, urgent and overlapping, and somehow still not fast enough. The monitor beside this gurney screamed his protests in mechanical wails that made seasoned nurses flinch. And then the SEAL sniper came awake, not groggy, not confused, trained. His arms shot up, ripping the oxygen line from his face with such force the plastic cracked. His eyes flared open, wild and precise, at the same time scanning the room like crosshairs hunting for targets. The nearest surgeon stumbled backward as if he'd just found himself staring down a rifle scope. "Don't touch me!" The words came out deep enough to shake the steel trays on their carts. "Not one of you." The monitor shrieked louder. One IV pole tipped over with a metallic crash. A resident's pen clattered to tile, and nobody moved to pick it up. This wasn't a patient resisting treatment. This was a warrior resisting surrender. A security officer reached for the restraints hanging from the gurney's rails, leather straps meant for the violent and the uncontrollable. Preston Hall, the attending physician, snapped his hand up like a traffic cop. "No, we're doing this clean and controlled." But the SEAL twisted so hard against the rails that the entire bed jerked an inch across the floor. Metal squealed, wheels locked and unlocked. The man's voice dropped into something lower, something that sounded like a promise and a threat wrapped into 2 words. "You strap me down, I'm gone. I will crawl out of here bleeding." They all froze, not because he was stronger than them, not because he could actually make it to the door, but because the look in his eyes said he'd already done it before, in worse condition, in worse places, and he'd survived every single time. A few steps back from the chaos, standing near the supply cart with a tray of fresh gauze in her hands, a young nurse paused. Meredith Blackwell, night shift, overlooked, calm in a storm that never bothered to learn her name. The ER staff called her Rookie, like it was stitched onto her uniform, even though she'd worked these halls for 3 years. She was small, maybe 5'4" in her sneakers, with auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail that never quite stayed neat. Her scrubs were standard issue, blue, unremarkable, the kind that said she wasn't important enough for anyone to notice. She didn't look at the shouting surgeons. She looked at him. Blood soaked through the dressings along his right flank, creeping upward with each labored breath. The pattern wasn't chaotic. It radiated in angles precise and geometric. Meredith's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly, reading that geometry the way other people read text. "Sir, you're in a safe facility." Dr. Hall tried again, his voice strained with professional calm that was starting to crack. "We need access to treat you. You're losing blood and you don't have clearance." The SEAL's voice cut through like a blade. "Back off, Boff." Meredith stepped forward. It was a small movement, silent, almost unnoticeable to everyone except the man on the gurney. His eyes tracked her approach immediately, breath-hitching muscles tensing again like coiled springs. "Nurse Blackwell, step back." Dr. Hall barked the order without looking at her. "This is not your case. He's combative, and you are not cleared to be." She kept walking. The doctors stared at her like she'd malfunctioned. The SEAL tracked her with the kind of focus that said he was calculating distance, threat, level, angle of approach. His hand twitched toward where a sidearm would normally rest. "No closer." His voice was raw, now edges fraying. "I don't know who you people are." Meredith didn't flinch. No apology, no bravado, no hesitation. She set the tray down beside the bed with a soft click and leaned in until only he could hear her. 6 quiet syllables rolled past her lips, spoken like memory rather than command. "Iron Wolf." His entire body stilled. Not softened, not surrendered, stilled. Like someone had hit a pause button on a machine that had been running at full combat speed. His jaw trembled once the only crack in a fortress of training that had been built over years of operations nobody would ever read about. "That can't be you," a resident whispered behind a gloved hand voice barely audible over the monitors. Did he just recognize her? No one answered because no one could. Meredith didn't explain, didn't confirm, didn't deny. Her expression didn't shift so much as a millimeter, but her eyes carried something old, something that didn't belong in fluorescent hospital light, something that belonged in deserts and darkness and decisions that left scars deeper than shrapnel. "Lie back," she murmured, voice low and steady. "You're bleeding faster than they think." He stared at her like he'd seen a ghost dressed in scrubs and standing in a place ghosts had no business being. His voice came out as a whisper, rough and disbelieving. "You don't understand. This wasn't random. They were waiting on the roof. They knew where I'd be." Meredith paused, gauze halfway lifted. She hadn't flinched when he'd raged at 20 doctors, but she flinched now. Just a fraction. Just enough. "How specific?" she asked quietly. "Exact nest, exact time, exact angle." Each word came out like pulling shrapnel from a wound. "Someone burned my hide before we even cleared comms." A few doctors exchanged looks. Confusion, not comprehension. Words that sounded like paranoia from a man who'd lost too much blood. But Meredith didn't look confused. She looked like she'd just swallowed a past life whole. Dr. Hall stepped forward, voice rising with the authority of someone who'd been trained to take control of chaos. "Nurse Blackwell, step aside. This is beyond your—" Meredith peeled back the soaked bandage. She didn't gasp, didn't shout. She went very, very still. Fragments spread. Thoracic hinge bruising. Blowback that didn't fan outward the way it should have. It focused, compressed, directional. Not enemy fire scattered by panic and distance. Not a street blast that tears through everything equally. Not even IED chaos with its signature of random destruction. This was a shaped charge. Rooftop placed. Meant for one nest and one nest only. The SEAL watched her face, reading it the way she'd read his wound. "You've seen that pattern before, haven't you?" She didn't answer. Couldn't answer. Because across the glass partition that separated the trauma bay from the hallway, two men in dark suits appeared. No badges visible, no scrubs, no rush. The kind of men who watched and didn't help. The kind who took notes and made calls and decided who lived and who disappeared. Meredith's throat tightened. "Scan him, ma'am," one surgeon insisted from behind her, voice tight with the need to do something, anything. "We need imaging now. You scanned too deeply without decompressing first." Meredith murmured, eyes still locked on the wound. "And you collapsed the lung you're trying to save." Heads turned, brows lifted. Nobody moved. "How do you know that?" A resident whispered the question like it might be dangerous to ask too loudly. Meredith didn't blink. "The same way he knows I'm not here to restrain him." The SEAL's eyes softened just a fraction. Not relief, not trust, but recognition. The recognition of a voice he'd once followed through smoke and fire and missions that officially never happened. He swallowed hard, Adam's apple bobbing. "They told me the nest was safe. Coordinates were sealed." Meredith held his gaze. Hers was dark and painfully clear. The kind of clarity that comes from seeing too much and surviving anyway. "They weren't sealed. They were sold." His breath broke. The monitors spiked. The surgeons surged forward, hands reaching, voices overlapping in a new wave of controlled panic. "Give him space." Meredith's voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It carried certainty the way steel carries weight. It stopped them cold. The suits behind the glass lifted phones to their ears, simultaneously, a synchronized movement that looked rehearsed. Overhead, the speakers crackled to life with a voice that sounded like it came from somewhere far above this emergency room. "South Wing lockdown initiated. Military liaison inbound." Hall spun toward the hallway, confusion breaking through his professional mask. "What? Why, who ordered?" The SEAL reached for Meredith's wrist. His grip was shaking, but deliberate fingers wrapping around her pulse point, like he needed to confirm she was real. His voice came out raw. "They're not here for me." She didn't have to ask who. She already knew. The ER lights hummed overhead, a sound that had always been there but suddenly felt too loud, too present, too aware. Monitors filled the silence between heartbeats with their mechanical counting. And for the first time since he'd been dragged through the automatic doors trailing blood and fury, the SEAL stopped resisting. Not for sedatives, not for surgeons, not for the authority of white coats and medical degrees. For her. Meredith stepped back, pulse steady beneath his fingers, until he had to let go. Her gaze cut once more to the wound, the one that belonged to a rooftop betrayal she'd prayed she'd never see again. This pattern, these angles, this signature of violence wrapped in precision. She didn't whisper, didn't comfort. She said the only words that mattered, the ones that would either save them both or doom them together. We need to move fast before the ones watching decide you don't leave this hospital alive. The room froze. Every doctor, every nurse, every resident, with their hands still gloved and ready, felt the temperature drop like winter had walked through the walls. The blinds on the glass partition finished closing. The hallway went silent, and the seal stabilized only by her voice and her presence, and the ghost of a call sign that should have been buried in classified files whispered the truth she'd tried to bury for 12 years. They burned my nest the same way they burned yours. 8:19 p.m. The trauma bay had transformed from controlled chaos into something that felt more like a courtroom, or maybe a confessional. The blinds were fully closed now, sealing out the corridor, sealing in a truth that none of them were ready to hear. Outside, the seats didn't leave. Their silhouettes held position through the frosted glass, patient as predators, still as statues. They weren't watching the man bleeding on the gurney. They were watching Meredith. Inside, every doctor seemed to be waiting for her to move, as if somehow gravity had shifted and she'd become the center of it. Not by force, not by rank, but by knowing. By carrying something in her eyes that said she understood what was happening in ways the rest of them couldn't begin to comprehend. Dr. Hall finally spoke, his voice clipped to hide the tremor running underneath. "Nurse Blackwell, enough, step back. Whatever personal connection he thinks he has to you, it doesn't change protocol." Meredith didn't move. The SEAL tried to adjust his position, but even that inch of motion sent a visible grimace across his jaw. Blood seeped through the fresh gauze she'd just applied. He wasn't resisting treatment anymore, but the tension in his muscles still lived there like memory. Elbows tucked, ribs guarded, throat positioned for the kind of silent movement that came before a kill order. "They timed it," he said softly, eyes fixed on Meredith with an intensity that made the doctors uncomfortable. "Extraction window changed at the last minute. Only 5 people had that update." A murmur rippled through the residents behind her. The surgeons exchanged glances that said they were starting to understand this wasn't standard trauma. This was something else, something that involved words like coordinates and extraction and burn words that belonged in war zones, not emergency rooms. Meredith didn't look up at them. Her mind wasn't working through charts or imaging protocols. It was working through patterns, the kind etched into memory from operations she'd never been allowed to discuss. Patterns that shouldn't exist outside of classified files and sealed testimony. "Who changed it?" she asked, voice steady as a flatline. The SEAL swallowed sweat sliding down his temple despite the air conditioning that kept the trauma bay cold as a morgue. "Home base, someone high up, someone who knew I trusted rooftop nests more than convoy routes." Meredith's heartbeat flickered. Not panic, recognition. He hadn't been hit because he'd broken formation. He'd been hit because formation had broken him. Because someone who knew how he operated had used that knowledge like a weapon, turning his training into a trap. Dr. Hall cleared his throat sharply, the sound of a man trying to reassert control over a situation that was slipping through his fingers like water. "That's enough. We need scans before we start inventing conspiracy theories." "No." The word came from Meredith. Not loud, not aggressive, just final. The residents stared, not at her defiance, but at the way she'd said it. Without apology, without doubt. That single syllable from her mouth didn't sound like a nurse refusing an order. It sounded like someone stating a fact that the universe would have to accept whether it wanted to or not. "You scan now," she continued, and his right lung collapses against the pressure. His pleural space is too tight from the blast geometry. He needs decompression first, imaging second. Dr. Hall blinked, his mouth open, then closed, then opened again. "Blast geometry. Where exactly were you trained, Nurse Blackwell?" Meredith moved her bloody gloves with careful precision and reached for a fresh pair. Calm, surgical, exact. She wasn't emotional. She wasn't rattled. She was operating from an instinct older than this hospital, older than these fluorescent lights, older than the lie she'd been living for the past 7 years. The SEAL's eyes didn't leave her face. He wasn't watching a nurse anymore. He was watching someone who had once walked rooftops beside men like him. Someone who knew angles humans shouldn't survive. Someone who recognized blast placement not as injury, but as intention. One of the younger surgeons lowered his voice, but the trauma bay was too quiet for secrets. "Nurse Blackwell, are you saying this was deliberate sabotage?" Meredith didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her silence was louder than any explanation. She turned the SEAL's body just enough to re-expose the wound's edge movements, practiced and gentle despite the weight of what she was revealing. The doctors leaned in expecting carnage. Instead, they saw something worse. A wound pattern that spoke of intention, not accident. Professional placement. Calculated destruction. The SEAL's voice came out raw, almost ashamed, like admitting weakness in front of strangers. If I hadn't moved when I did, they would have taken my head. That charge wasn't built to scare me off the nest. It was built to erase it. A nurse behind them gasped, the sound small and human in a room that had stopped feeling like either. Someone dropped a pen. The metallic click of it hitting tile seemed impossibly loud. The suits outside didn't move, didn't shift, didn't touch the door handle. They just stood there watching through frosted glass like judges waiting for a verdict. Meredith spoke only to him now, voice dropping low enough that the others had to strain to hear. How did they know where you'd be? He didn't blink, didn't look away. I told you only 5 people. Only 5 had the coordinate update. Meredith's jaw locked, a muscle ticking beneath skin that had gone pale. He was listing the same number she'd once had back when there were 5 people who knew where her team would be, then 4, then 3, then a rooftop that never gave all of them back. Before another word could land between them, the monitor shrieked, heart rate climbing fast, oxygen dipping, blood pressure dropping in a way that looked wild on the screen, but wasn't random at all. This wasn't panic. This was his body remembering the blast before his mind could stop it. A resident rushed for the sedative tray, hands already reaching for the syringe that would force him under, force him quiet, force him compliant. No. The SEAL's voice cracked with something that sounded like terror disguised as command. Meredith lifted one hand, a quiet gesture. Unspoken. Simple. Don't touch him. The room obeyed. Dr. Hall stared at her like she'd just performed surgery without permission. You can't let a combative patient dictate his own care. We need to. He's not combative, Meredith said, cutting him off with the kind of certainty that left no room for debate. He's responding to precision trauma. You sedate him, now you trigger tactile flashback, and you'll lose him to the memory, not the injury. She pressed 2 fingers lightly against the SEAL's shoulder. Not pressure, not restraint, just presence. Just the reminder that someone was there who understood what his body was doing, even if his mind couldn't articulate it. His breathing slowed, not immediately, not magically, but by degrees, like a machine powering down from combat readiness to something closer to standby. The alarms still beeped, their protests erratic and angry, but the man beneath them unclenched. Fists opened, jaw loosened, eyes stopped scanning for exits. Everyone else in that room finally saw it. The thing Meredith had known from the moment she'd whispered those 2 words. He wasn't afraid of dying, he was afraid of disappearing. Of being erased the same way that rooftop had tried to erase him, the same way the blast had tried to bury him under rubble and silence and official reports that would call it enemy action and close the file forever. The suits outside finally moved. One lifted a phone to his ear, lips moving in conversation no one inside could hear. The other lowered the blinds halfway, just enough that their faces became visible. Just enough to send a message that they were still there, still watching, still waiting. Meredith didn't turn. She checked the bleeding again, slow and methodical, her expression not horrified but confirmed. The exact pattern she'd prayed she'd never see again. The signature she'd spent 12 years trying to forget. Nurse Blackwell. Dr. Hall's voice had gone quiet now, the anger drained out and replaced with something closer to awe or maybe fear. You're not just a night shift nurse, are you? Meredith didn't respond. The SEAL did. She's the one they never debriefed. His words came out hoarse but clear. The only one who walked out when the rest of us didn't. The room didn't gasp this time. They just went still. The kind of stillness that comes when people realize they've been standing next to something dangerous without knowing it. Something that had been hiding in plain sight, wearing scrubs and restocking supplies, and then answering to Rookie like it was her real name. Meredith set her jaw and finally looked at Dr. Hall. Scans in 15 minutes, chest tube first. Stabilize the lung, then imaging. And only when his vitals can tolerate supine position. Dr. Hall nodded. He didn't argue. Not because he understood the medicine, but because her certainty was louder than his training. Because whatever she was, whatever she'd been, it was clear she knew things about trauma that couldn't be learned in a classroom. The SEAL exhaled the breath, shaking but real. His eyes softened, but only when looking at her. Thank you, he whispered, voice fraying at the edges. Meredith didn't blink. Don't thank me. Just stay awake. His gaze flicked toward the blinds again, toward the silhouettes of men who carried authority without uniforms and made decisions without oversight. They'll ask for me. They always ask for the survivor. Meredith froze. Then just for a heartbeat, she let truth show beneath the scrubs and the name tag, and the 3 years of playing invisible. No, she said softly, the words falling like stones into still water. This time they came for me. Every doctor in that room felt it, the temperature dropping, the air pressure changing. The sense that something had just shifted in ways that had nothing to do with medicine and everything to do with the kind of wars that don't end when the shooting stops. The blinds finished closing, the hallway went silent, and the SEAL lying on a gurney surrounded by people who would never fully understand what had just happened realized something that made his blood run colder than any wound ever could. They hadn't burned his nest to kill him. They'd burned his nest to find her. 2 hours had passed since the doors closed. The trauma bay had settled into an uneasy quiet, the kind that felt less like peace and more like the breath held before an explosion. Wyatt Drake lay stabilized on the gurney chest tube, draining steadily vitals, climbing back towards something resembling normal. The immediate crisis had passed, but the larger one loomed like a storm on radar. Meredith hadn't gone home, hadn't even left the wing. She'd stayed moving through her shift with mechanical precision, restocking supplies that didn't need restocking, checking equipment that was already checked. The other nurses gave her space, sensing something they couldn't name, but knew enough not to approach. Dr. Hall had tried once, walking up with questions written across his face. She'd met his eyes with such quiet intensity that the words died in his throat. He'd nodded, backed away, and hadn't tried again. Now at 2:47 a.m., the hospital had shifted into its graveyard rhythm. Skeleton crew, dim lights, the hum of machines keeping people alive while the world outside slept. Meredith sat in the empty staff lounge, laptop open on the table in front of her. Not the hospital's computer, her own. The one with access codes. She wasn't supposed to have any more pathways into databases that should have been closed to her the day she signed her discharge papers. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. Muscle memory from another life, typing commands that would make IT security directors lose sleep. She wasn't trying to hide her digital footprints. At this point, if they were looking, they'd already found her. The screen populated with files, personnel records, after-action reports, casualty notifications. She typed 4 names. 4 people who'd been on that Fallujah rooftop in November 2012. 4 survivors besides herself. Staff Sergeant Tyler Blackwood. Status deceased. Single vehicle collision, Highway 95, Arizona. Date March 15, 2024. No other vehicles involved. Toxicology clean. Cause driver error. Meredith's jaw tightened. Tyler had been their communications specialist. 23 years old on that rooftop, hands steady enough to splice fiber optic cable under fire. She'd seen him drive Humvees through IED-laden roads without flinching. Driver error didn't fit. She clicked the next file. Corporal Madison Whitmore. Status deceased, apparent suicide. Single gunshot wound, self-inflicted. Date May 27, 2024. Service weapon, no note. History of PTSD treatment. Madison, Reaper. The nickname had come from her precision with a rifle, not her personality. She'd been the one who laughed hardest at terrible jokes, who sent care packages to her kid sister every month without fail. PTSD, yes, they all had it. But Suicide Madison had been planning to open a shooting range for veterans, had talked about it constantly. Meredith's fingers hovered over the keyboard before clicking again. Lieutenant Jackson Thornhill. Status deceased, overdose prescription medication. Date July 8, 2024. Accidental. Medical examiner ruled misuse of pain management drugs. No suspicious circumstances. Jackson. Their team leader on the ground that night. The one who'd argued with Major Graves about the mission parameters, who'd questioned why they were there at all. He'd gotten out, gone to law school, was working as a veterans advocate last she'd heard. And now he was dead from pills. One more name left. Her hands shook slightly as she typed it. Sergeant Derek Holloway. Status deceased. House fire. Date December 3rd, 2024. Electrical malfunction. Body recovered. Dental records confirmed identity. Derek, ghost. They'd called him that because he moved through rooms like Sonk, always somehow exactly where he needed to be. Fire investigations said electrical. But Ghost had been an electrician before enlisting. He'd rewired half the fob in Fallujah because the contractors had done it wrong. Electrical malfunction felt like a sick joke. 4 deaths, 4 different causes, 4 accidents spread across 8 months, all ruled non-suspicious by local authorities who had no reason to look deeper, no context to make them wonder if maybe these dots connected into something darker. Meredith leaned back in her chair, eyes burning from screen glare, and something that felt dangerously close to tears she wouldn't allow herself to shed. 5 survivors from that rooftop. Now just her and Wyatt, who'd been on the ground team when it collapsed, who she'd pulled from rubble while command screamed at her to leave him. This wasn't coincidence. This was house cleaning. Her phone buzzed against the table, the vibration obscenely loud in the silent lounge. Unknown number. She stared at it for 3 rings before answering. Blackwell? You're looking at files you shouldn't be able to access. The voice was male, calm, familiar. Agent Victor Kane. That tells me 2 things. Either you're very good at what you do, or someone wants you to find what you're finding. Meredith's grip tightened on the phone. 4 deaths in 8 months. All my team, all ruled accidental. I know. You knew and you didn't. Warn you, Kane's voice carried the weight of someone who'd made calculations she wouldn't like. Ms. Blackwell, until tonight you were nobody. A night shift nurse with a sealed file and a discharge that made you invisible. Warning you would have painted a target you didn't have. And now you're standing in a trauma bay with Corporal Drake, who whispered your call sign loud enough for 20 people to hear. Now you're visible. Now the same people who've been cleaning house know exactly where to find you. Meredith stood pacing to the window. Outside, Charleston slept under sodium lights and southern humidity. Normal, peaceful, oblivious. Who's doing this, she asked. Who has the reach to make 4 murders look like accidents across 4 states? Kane was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped to something that sounded almost like regret. How much do you remember about that night in Fallujah, the real mission, not the cover story? I remember everything. Then you remember what your team witnessed. Who was there? What was being traded? Meredith closed her eyes. She could still see it even through 12 years and all the distance she'd tried to put between herself and that rooftop. The compound below, the meeting. U.S. military officers in a room with men who wore no uniforms but carried authority like weapons. Crates being opened. Weapons systems that weren't supposed to exist outside of classified facilities changing hands with handshakes and smiles. Major Graves, she said. He was overseeing it. Major Graves, who is now General Nathaniel Graves. 3 stars, Joint Chiefs Advisor, oversees $80 billion in defense procurement annually, and 12 years ago he was running a black market pipeline that sold American weapons tech to the highest bidder. Meredith felt something cold settle in her chest. We documented it. We had photos, radio intercepts, serial numbers. All destroyed in the collapse. Graves made sure of it. The rooftop you were on wasn't hit by enemy mortars, Miss Blackwell. It was demo charges, planted by our own people. Time to erase any evidence and anyone who might testify. We survived, she said quietly. 5 of us made it out. Which is why he spent 12 years making sure that mistake gets corrected. Slowly, carefully. One accident at a time, spread out enough that no investigator would connect them. Kane paused. Until Drake. What does Wyatt have to do with weapons trafficking from 2012? Drake wasn't targeted because of Fallujah. He was targeted because he stumbled onto the same pipeline, still operating now bigger. He was carrying evidence of $4 billion in fraudulent defense contracts. Evidence that traces back to the same network Graves built. When we started connecting Drake's case to your old team, we realized we weren't looking at 2 conspiracies. We were looking at one that never stopped. Meredith pressed her forehead against the cool glass. He's been killing us to protect his operation. He's been killing you to protect his empire. And now that you've surfaced, now that you're connected to Drake in front of witnesses and hospital cameras and security logs, you're not a ghost he can erase quietly anymore. You're a problem that needs immediate solution. As if summoned by Kane's words, movement caught Meredith's eye in the parking lot below. 2 vehicles, dark SUVs with government plates pulling into spaces near the emergency entrance. 4 men emerged dressed in plain clothes but moving with the coordination that screamed federal or military or private contractor playing at both. I see them, she said. That's not us, Kane replied. FBI isn't there yet. Those are Graves cleaners. In a hospital, there are cameras, witnesses, protocols. Ms. Blackwell, these men have authorization that supersedes all of that. They'll walk in with credentials that say DoD flash badges that make administrators stand aside, and they'll take Drake into protective custody. Except he won't make it to any safe location, and if you interfere, will have a tragic accident sometime in the next 72 hours. Meredith watched the men enter the building, watched the way they moved casual but purposeful, like they owned every space they walked through. How long before they reach his room? 5 minutes, maybe less. I'm 30 minutes out with actual federal protection, but that's too long. You can't fight them alone. You're one person unarmed in a civilian hospital. They are trained operators with legal authority and lethal intent. Meredith was already moving phone pressed to her ear, laptop forgotten on the table. Then I guess it's time they learned why Iron Wolf was the only call sign that ever scared them. She hung up before Kane could argue, before he could give her orders she had no intention of following. Her mind shifted gears, slipping out of the careful neutrality she'd maintained for 7 years and back into the tactical clarity that had kept her alive through 2 tours. The hospital layout unfolded in her memory like a map. Wyatt was in recovery room 4B South Wing, 3rd floor. The cleaners would take the main elevator, confident, invisible, because authority was its own disguise. That gave her maybe 4 minutes. She moved fast through the corridors, not running, but walking with purpose that made the few night shift staff glance at her and then look away, sensing something that told them not to get involved. The storage closet on the 2nd floor was supposed to be locked, but Meredith had learned years ago that a properly bent paperclip could defeat hospital locks in under 10 seconds. Inside, she grabbed what she needed: syringes, sedatives that weren't tracked as closely as narcotics, scalpels, rubbing alcohol, a handful of items that looked medical but could become something else in the right hands. She'd been a combat medic, yes, but combat medics didn't just save lives. They learned human anatomy well enough to know exactly where to cut to disable without killing, where to strike, to immobilize, how to turn medical knowledge into tactical advantage when the situation demanded it. Room 4B was quiet when she entered. Wyatt was awake, staring at the ceiling with the look of someone who'd stopped, expecting sleep to come without nightmares. He turned his head as she entered, eyes focusing immediately. "They're coming, aren't they? No question mark. Just statement of fact. 4 men. Downstairs now. They'll be here in 3 minutes." Wyatt started to sit up, grimaced at the pain but pushed through it. "My gear is locked in hospital security. You can barely stand, you're unarmed, and you have a chest tube that'll drop you if you move wrong." Meredith was already repositioning his bed, angling it so anyone entering would have their back to the bathroom door. "So you're going to let me handle this? Handle 4 operators? You're a nurse." "I'm Iron Wolf." She said it simply, without bravado. And they're about to remember why that name was classified. Footsteps in the hallway, multiple sets moving with the measured pace of people who had time and authority. Meredith positioned herself in the bathroom door, cracked just enough to see through. She held a syringe in one hand, filled with enough propofol to drop a man in seconds. The door opened. 2 men entered first, sweeping the room with practiced efficiency, even though it was just a hospital recovery room with 1 wounded patient and standard medical equipment. They wore polo shirts and khakis, the universal uniform of federal agents trying not to look federal. Shoulder holsters visible if you knew where to look. "Corporal Drake," the first one said, pulling credentials that probably said Department of Defense. "We're here to transport you to a secure facility. Doctor's orders have been cleared. We're authorized to move you immediately." Wyatt didn't move. "I didn't request transport." "It's not a request." The second man moved closer, hand drifting toward his holster. "There's been a credible threat. We need to relocate you now." "Where's Agent Kane?" "He's my liaison." "Agent Kane has been reassigned. We're your detail now." That was the tell. Kane wouldn't be reassigned from his own investigation. Wyatt caught it too. His body tensed, ready for violence. His injuries wouldn't let him execute. The first man pulled his weapon, not aiming, but making it visible. "Corporal, we can do this cooperative, or we can sedate you and do it anyway. Your choice." Meredith moved. She came out of the bathroom, fast and silent, syringe leading. The second man registered movement in his peripheral vision and started to turn, but she was already inside his reach. She drove the needle into his neck, depressing the plunger in one smooth motion, and he was unconscious before his hand reached his weapon. The first man spun, gun coming up, training taking over. But Meredith had already dropped into a crouch, sweeping his legs with a kick that was more anatomy than martial arts, hitting the nerve cluster behind his knee that made the joint buckle involuntarily. He went down hard. She was on him before he could recover, hand striking his wrist to dislodge the gun, other hand pressing against the carotid artery with precisely calculated pressure. Not enough to kill, just enough to starve the brain of oxygen until consciousness flickered and died. 10 seconds. 2 men down, both breathing, both alive, both completely neutralized. The other 2 came through the door like thunder weapons already drawn, having heard their partners fall. Meredith grabbed the first man's dropped gun, rolled behind the hospital bed using Wyatt's gurney as cover. "Federal agents!" the third man shouted. "Drop the weapon!" "Real federal agents don't execute wounded soldiers," Meredith called back. But General Graves's contractors do. Silence. Then a different voice, older, carrying command weight. You're Iron Wolf. And you're the cleanup crew that murdered Tyler, Madison, Jackson, and Derek. 4 accidents. 4 lies. 4 people who deserve better than being erased to protect a traitor's empire. We're authorized. You're assassins with credentials. There's a difference. The third man moved, trying to flank around the bed. Meredith didn't shoot. Couldn't. Real federal agents or not, she wasn't ready to cross that line yet. Instead, she threw the scalpel she'd palmed, not at him, but at the IV bag hanging beside his head. It burst saline, spraying directly into his face and eyes. He stumbled, blinded and shocked, and Wyatt, moving through pain that would have dropped, most men, grabbed his arm and twisted, using the man's own momentum to slam him face first into the wall. The fourth man fired. The shot went wide, hitting equipment. Instead of people, the sound catastrophically loud in the small room. Alarms erupted. Somewhere down the hall, voices shouted. Security would be here in seconds. Meredith stepped out from cover gun, trained on the fourth man, with the kind of steady aim that said this wasn't her first time holding a weapon with intent. You have one chance. Drop it and walk away, or stay and explain to hospital security why you're shooting at patients. The man's eyes calculated odds. He was outgunned not by firepower but by circumstance. Too many witnesses now. Too much noise. Whatever authorization he carried wouldn't survive this much exposure. He lowered his weapon. This isn't over. No, Meredith agreed. It's not. Tell Graves that Iron Wolf is alive. Tell him I remember everything. And tell him I'm coming. The man backed toward the door, grabbed his semi-conscious partner, and disappeared into the hallway chaos. The other 2 remained on the floor, breathing but unconscious, their credentials and weapons scattered around them, like evidence of a crime scene that would never be properly investigated. Wyatt stared at Meredith with new understanding. You weren't just a medic. I was exactly a medic, she replied, checking his chest tube to make sure the violence hadn't dislodged it. But combat medics learn to fight because sometimes the only way to save lives is to end the threat first. Hospital security burst through the door, weapons drawn, confusion written across their faces at the scene before them. Dr. Hall was right behind them, taking in the 2 unconscious men, the discharged weapon, the overturned equipment, and Meredith standing in the center of it all with a gun in her hand that she calmly set down on the counter. Nurse Blackwell, what the hell? They tried to take him, she said simply. They would have killed him. I stopped them. By assaulting federal agents. By defending a patient from contractors pretending to be federal agents. She looked at him with eyes that had seen things he couldn't imagine. Check their credentials. Run their ID. You'll find they don't match any legitimate federal database. And when Agent Kane arrives, he'll confirm what I'm telling you. Hall stared at her like he was seeing her for the first time. Not the quiet night shift nurse who restocked supplies. Not the rookie everyone dismissed. But something else entirely. Something dangerous, incompetent, and absolutely certain. Who are you? He asked quietly. Before Meredith could answer, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, a text from an unknown number. 3 words that made her blood run cold. Check your email. She pulled out her laptop, fingers flying across keys, while security secured the scene and paramedics checked the unconscious contractors. The email loaded. No sender name. Just a video file attachment and a timestamp from 1 week ago. She clicked play. The video was grainy, shot from a distance, but the audio was crystal clear. A woman sitting in a car, phone held up like she was recording a confession. Meredith recognized her immediately, even though she'd aged, even though stress had carved new lines around her eyes. Madison Whitmore. Reaper. Dead 2 months ago, supposedly by her own hand. Red, if you're seeing this, I'm dead. Madison's voice was steady but urgent. They came for me 3 days ago. Told me it was routine follow-up on the Fallujah incident. Asked questions about what I remembered, who I'd talked to, whether I'd kept any documentation. I lied. Said I remembered nothing. But they knew I was lying. Madison looked over her shoulder, paranoid, checking her surroundings. They're using something called Protocol Iron Recall. It's not about bringing us back. It's about erasing us. We saw something in Fallujah we weren't supposed to see. The rooftop collapse wasn't enemy action. It was sanctioned. Someone high up ordered it to cover up the weapons deal. We were witnesses. Loose ends. Her voice cracked slightly. They've been killing us quietly. Tyler, Jackson, Derek. They made it look like accidents, but I've been tracking it. We're all on a list, Red. All 5 survivors. And they won't stop until that list is complete. Madison pulled out a piece of paper, holding it up to the camera. Names, dates, connections drawn in black ink between contractors, shell companies, and one name written larger than the rest at the center of the web. General Nathaniel Graves, Warhawk. Find Warhawk, Madison said. Auschwitz said, find who gave him authority to run that pipeline. Find who's still protecting him. And Red, run, because they're saving you for last. The one that got away, the one who knows the most. They'll come for you when they're ready and they'll make sure there's nothing left to find. The video ended. Madison's face froze on screen, eyes wide with fear and determination, and Meredith felt something break inside her chest. Not grief. She'd processed grief already when she'd read the casualty report. This was rage, pure and cold and focused. Wyatt had moved beside her, watching the video over her shoulder despite the pain it cost him. Warhawk, I know that name. Meredith looked at him. How? That was my mission commander 5 years ago, before I transferred units. Lieutenant Colonel Nathaniel Graves. He ran special operations logistics out of Qatar. Good officer, everyone said. Decorated. Connected. He's a 3-star general now, Meredith said quietly. And he's been running a black market weapons pipeline for at least 12 years. The rooftop I was on, we were documenting his deals. The evidence that would have ended his career died when that building collapsed. And my evidence, Wyatt asked. The defense contracts I was carrying. Meredith pulled up another file on her laptop, cross-referencing the names from Madison's video with the shell companies involved in Wyatt's investigation. The connections lit up like a conspiracy map that was less theory and more documented fact. Your contracts trace back to the same network, same suppliers, same offshore accounts. Graves didn't stop after Fallujah. He expanded. Weapons tech, classified systems, anything with a black budget and loose oversight. He's been building an empire for over a decade, and everyone who might expose it has died convenient deaths. Security had finally removed the 2 unconscious contractors from the room. Dr. Hall lingered in the doorway, listening despite himself drawn into a reality that had nothing to do with medicine and everything to do with the kind of evil that wore uniforms and carried flags. How do we stop him? Wyatt asked. He's a general. He has resources, authority, protection at the highest levels. We're 2 people. Nobody will believe. Meredith closed her laptop. She thought of Madison's video, Tyler's car crash, Jackson's overdose, Derek's fire. 4 friends who trusted that someone would protect them, that being right would be enough, that the truth would matter. They'd all been wrong. We don't stop him by playing defense, she said. We stop him by making him come to us, by forcing him into a position where he has to act publicly, where whatever he does leaves evidence that can't be erased. How? Meredith stood, feeling muscles that hadn't been used in years, waking up training that she'd tried to bury reasserting itself. We go back to where it started. We draw him out using the one thing he wants more than anything, which is... She met Wyatt's eyes, and for the first time since whispering that call sign over his dying body, she let herself fully inhabit what she'd been before the discharge, before the hospital scrubs, before the careful invisibility. Me, she said. We give him Iron Wolf. Agent Victor Kane arrived with the dawn, bringing with him 6 FBI agents and a paper trail that made the hospital administrators very nervous and very cooperative. The 2 unconscious contractors had been taken into federal custody, their credentials already proven fraudulent, their weapons traced back to a private military company that officially didn't exist. Meredith stood in the conference room that had been commandeered as a temporary command center, watching Kane spread files across the table like he was laying out a hand of cards where every draw was deadly. General Nathaniel Graves, Kane said, tapping a photo of a distinguished man in dress uniform, silver stars gleaming on his shoulders. 3-star general, Joint Chiefs Advisor, oversees $80 billion in annual defense procurement, decorated veteran with tours in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria. On paper, he's a patriot. In reality, he's been running the largest weapons trafficking operation in U.S. military history. Wyatt sat in a wheelchair beside the table, chest tube still draining, but vitals stable enough that the doctors had stopped hovering. How long have you known? We've suspected for 3 years, Kane admitted. But suspicion isn't evidence. Graves has protected himself with layers of shell companies' offshore accounts and enough legitimate transactions to camouflage the illegal ones. Every time we got close, witnesses disappeared or evidence was destroyed. We couldn't build a prosecutable case. Until now, Meredith said quietly. Kane looked at her with the expression of someone who'd calculated the odds and didn't like the answer, but couldn't find a better one. Until now, Drake's evidence, combined with your testimony about Fallujah, gives us the connection we need. 2 separate incidents, 12 years apart, same pattern, same commanding officer. That's not coincidence. That's conspiracy. It's also not enough to arrest a three-star general, Meredith replied. His lawyers will bury it in classified proceedings and national security claims. We need him on record. We need a confession. Which is why you want to use yourself as bait. Kane's voice carried disapproval that stopped just short of refusal. You surface publicly, connect yourself to Drake, and wait for Graves to come after you with enough force that he exposes himself. Yes, that's not a plan. That's suicide with extra steps. Meredith leaned forward, hands flat on the table. Madison Whitmore sent me that video a week before she died. She knew they were coming. She prepared evidence, documented everything, and it didn't save her because she was alone and hiding. I'm not going to hide. I'm going to make Graves come to me in a place where his actions can't be covered up. Where? Wyatt asked. Here, the hospital. Meredith gestured to the building around them. Public space, cameras everywhere, civilian staff who don't answer to military authority. We announce we're transferring Wyatt to federal custody, make it loud and official, and we wait for Graves to make his move. Kane shook his head. He won't come himself. He'll send contractors, mercenaries, people with enough deniability that he stays clean. He will if I give him no choice. Meredith pulled out her phone, opened a new email, and began typing. I'm going to send him everything. Madison's video, photos from Fallujah that I kept against orders, names, dates, transactions. And I'm going to tell him that if anything happens to me or Drake, it all goes public. Automatic upload to every major news outlet. That's a death sentence, Kane said flatly. The moment he knows you have that evidence, you become a threat that has to be eliminated immediately. Good. Let him come. Let him bring everything he has. Because when he does, you'll be here to document every illegal action, every violation, every moment that proves he's exactly what we say he is. Kane studied her for a long moment. You really think you can survive his response? Meredith thought of Tyler, Madison, Jackson, Derek. 4 friends who died believing someone else would fight this battle. 4 people who'd trusted the system to protect them and been proven fatally wrong. I don't have to survive, she said quietly. I just have to make sure the truth does. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of what she was proposing. Wyatt broke it first. You're not doing this alone. You have a chest tube and can barely walk. I can shoot, I can think, and I'm not letting Iron Wolf go into combat without backup. His voice carried the kind of certainty that came from oaths sworn and never forgotten. You pulled me out of rubble in Fallujah. You saved my life twice in this hospital. I'm not walking away now. Neither am I. Everyone turned. Doctor, don't. Preston Hall stood in the doorway, still wearing yesterday's scrubs exhaustion written in the lines around his eyes. Before you argue, hear me out. I'm not a soldier. I don't know tactics or combat or any of that. But I know this hospital better than anyone. I know every corridor, every service entrance, every camera blind spot that contractors might use. And I know how to treat trauma injuries in real time, which you're going to need if this goes the way you think it will. Dr. Hall, this isn't your fight, Kane started. You're wrong. Hall's voice was firm. The moment someone fired a weapon in my emergency room, it became my fight. The moment they tried to take a patient from my care, it became my responsibility. I took an oath to protect the people in this building, and that includes both of them. He gestured to Meredith and Wyatt. So either you let me help or you explain to my medical board why you allowed combat operations in a civilian hospital without medical oversight. Kane looked like he wanted to argue but couldn't find the angle. He turned to Meredith. This is your operation. Your call. Meredith met Hall's eyes, saw determination there and fear that was being overruled by conscience. He wasn't a warrior. He was a doctor, choosing to stand in the line of fire because it was right. That kind of courage was rarer and more valuable than any military training. Welcome to the team, doctor, she said, but you follow my orders when this starts. No arguments, no hesitation. Can you do that? Yes, ma'am. She almost smiled at the automatic military courtesy from someone who'd never served. Almost. Then let's get to work. We have maybe 12 hours before Graves responds to my email. We need to turn this hospital into a place where he can't win no matter what he brings. The next 6 hours blurred into preparation that felt like planning a defense with civilian resources and military thinking. Kane coordinated with FBI tactical teams, positioning them in adjacent buildings with sight lines on every hospital entrance. Wyatt, despite his injuries, drew tactical maps from memory, identifying choke points and fallback positions that made sense for a building designed for healing, not warfare. Meredith moved through the hospital with Dr. Hall, learning layouts she'd worked in for 3 years, but never studied with tactical eyes. Service elevators that required key cards. stairwells with doors that locked from the inside, supply closets that could become defensive positions, the parking garage with its multiple levels and limited access points. If they come with a full team, Hall said as they walked the third-floor corridor, how many are we talking about? Graves won't send a team, he'll send an army. Meredith paused at a window overlooking the parking lot. He spent 12 years building his operation. He's killed at least 4 people to protect it. He's not going to risk exposure by half-measuring the response. He'll bring overwhelming force with the assumption that, whatever happens, he has enough authority to classify the aftermath. Can he do that? Can a general just attack a hospital? He won't call it an attack. He'll call it a necessary extraction of a high-value target during a credible terrorist threat. By the time anyone questions the story, we'll be dead and the evidence will be destroyed. Hall paled slightly. And Kane, the FBI, will serve as witnesses and deterrent. Graves can't just eliminate federal agents without triggering an investigation even he can't control. So he'll try to separate us, first isolate us from protection, then claim whatever happens was justified response to hostile action. How do we stop that? Meredith turned from the window. We don't let him separate us. We stay visible, they stay public, and we make sure every action he takes is documented. Modern warfare isn't won by who shoots first. It's won by who controls the narrative afterward. Her phone buzzed, email notification. She opened it knowing before she read it what it would say. From ngraves at .mail.mil. Subject negotiation. Ms. Blackwell, I received your message. Before this escalates beyond repair, I'd like to speak with you privately. Officer to officer. Professional courtesy. You name the place. I'll come alone. Perhaps we can find a solution that doesn't require more bloodshed. Respectfully, General N. Graves. Meredith read it twice, parsing the subtext. Officer to officer meant he was acknowledging what she'd been. Professional courtesy meant he was offering a deal. Come alone meant he wanted her isolated. Solution meant he'd already decided what that solution was, and it ended with her dead. She showed the email to Kane, who joined them on the 3rd floor. He read it and cursed quietly. He's trying to separate you from protection. He's trying to end this quietly before it becomes public spectacle, Meredith corrected, which means our strategy is working. He's rattled. Rattled men make desperate decisions. Good, I want him desperate. Desperate means mistakes. She typed a response, each word chosen like placing stones on a board. General Graves, I appreciate the offer, but I learned in Fallujah not to trust your definition of negotiation. If you want to talk, you're welcome to come to St. Augustine Medical Center. 3rd floor, public space, lots of witnesses. Bring your lawyers if it helps you sleep. We both know how this ends. The only question is whether you walk into federal custody voluntarily or get dragged there. Respectfully, Iron Wolf. She hit send before Kane could argue. Now we wait. For what? Him to accept your invitation. For him to reject it and come anyway, but on his terms and his timeline. Probably tonight when the hospital is understaffed and civilian presence is minimal. He'll bring contractors, overwhelm security, and try to make it look like we were the aggressors. Kane pulled out his phone, making calls that would position more federal presence around the hospital. Wyatt wheeled himself over, face tight with pain he was pushing through. If he comes tonight, I need to be mobile. This wheelchair makes me a liability. You move too fast and you reopen everything we just stabilized, Hall interjected. But I can give you a mobility harness, something that stabilizes the chest tube and gives you range of motion without compromising the drainage. How long? Give me 2 hours. Wyatt nodded. Meredith recognized the look in his eyes. The acceptance that pain was temporary, but failure was permanent. The willingness to trade physical suffering for tactical advantage. It was the same calculation every combat soldier made, the same math she'd done 100 times in the field. The day crawled forward with agonizing slowness. Hospital staff went about their routines, oblivious to the preparation happening around them. Patients received care. Surgeries were performed. Life continued with the blind momentum of normalcy, while underneath a different reality assembled itself piece by piece. FBI agents cycled through in civilian clothes, mapping the building, establishing communications protocols. Kane brought in additional resources, surveillance equipment that could document everything, lawyers who specialized in military law and could counter whatever legal authority Graves claimed. At 6:00 p.m., the hospital started its evening shift change. Fewer staff, quieter corridors, the transition from day to night when visibility dropped and attention wandered. At 6:47 p.m., Meredith's phone buzzed. Text message, unknown number. He's moving. 12-vehicle convoy left Fort Jackson 30 minutes ago. ETA, your location 22 minutes. This is bigger than we thought. He's bringing a full tactical unit. Kane appeared at her shoulder, reading the message over her arm. Fort Jackson is Army. He's using active duty personnel for this. Under what authorization, Meredith asked. Probably classified training exercise. Live combat scenario. Urban warfare practice. By the time anyone questions the paperwork, it'll be over. Kane's phone erupted with calls. He answered, listened, his face going progressively grimmer. FBI can't intervene in military operations without explicit authorization. My field office is trying to get federal marshals involved, but that takes time we don't have. So we're alone. No, you have me and 6 agents in this building, but against a full tactical unit with military authorization? Kane didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Wyatt rolled up wearing the harness Hall had fabricated, a combination of medical support and tactical rigging that looked like it belonged in a combat medic's nightmare but functioned. How many? 12 vehicles, Meredith said. Figure 4 to 6 per vehicle. Could be 70+ operators. Against 8 of us. Wyatt checked the pistol Kane had reluctantly provided him. I've had worse odds. Never, but there's a first time for everything. Despite everything, despite the fear and the certainty of violence coming, Meredith almost laughed. Dark humor was how soldiers processed impossible situations. It was how they stayed functional when logic said they should be terrified. Dr. Hall, she said, pulling the physician aside, last chance to walk away. What's coming through those doors isn't healthcare. It's war. Hall's hands were shaking, but his voice was steady. I'm staying. Someone needs to keep you all alive long enough to testify. Then lock down the 3rd floor. Emergency protocols. Nobody in or out except through controlled access. Move all patients to the East Wing away from the main entrance. And get every staff member you trust to start documenting everything. Phone cameras, security feeds, anything that records. We need evidence of what happens next. Hall nodded and moved off, issuing orders that got immediate compliance because hospitals were built on hierarchies, and he was the attending physician. Within 10 minutes, the 3rd floor had transformed. Patients relocated, non-essential staff evacuated, doors secured. Meredith stood at the main nurses' station, the central position that offered sightlines down 3 corridors and access to the stairwell. Kane's agents had positioned themselves at strategic points, armed but trying not to look like an occupying force. Wyatt anchored the east corridor using a supply cart as both cover and concealment. The hospital settled into an uneasy quiet, the kind that felt like breathing between storms. At 7:09 p.m., the power went out. Emergency generators kicked in immediately, but for 3 seconds, the building was pitch black. In that darkness, Meredith heard the sound of vehicles arriving. Doors opening, boots on pavement, the orchestrated movement of trained personnel executing a planned operation. When the lights came back, they were dimmer emergency lighting that cast everything in harsh shadows. Kane cursed. They cut main power. That's not improvisation. They had time to scout this. How long were they planning this? Wyatt asked. Since the moment I sent that email, Meredith replied. Maybe longer. Maybe he's been planning how to eliminate Iron Wolf for 12 years and just needed me to surface. The main stairwell door burst open. Not subtly, not with any pretense of medical emergency. It crashed inward with the force of a breaching ram, and 6 operators in full tactical gear poured through. Body armor, helmets, rifles, the uniform of federal action with no identifying patches. No unit designations, nothing that said who they were or what authority they claimed. Federal action in progress, the lead operator shouted. All personnel evacuate immediately. This building is under quarantine protocols. It was a lie wrapped in official language designed to scatter civilians and isolate targets. Kane stepped forward, badge raised. FBI, this hospital is under federal protection. You need to identify your commanding officer and authorization. The operator's rifle swung toward Kane. Not firing, just targeting, making a point. Sir, this is a DOD operation. FBI doesn't have jurisdiction. Stand down. I'm not standing anywhere. Kane's voice carried the weight of someone who'd faced down armed suspects before and wouldn't be intimidated by uniforms. You're operating on civilian property without clearance. That makes this an illegal military action on U.S. soil. Lower your weapon. For 3 seconds, the standoff held. The operator with his rifle trained on a federal agent, Kane with his badge raised like a shield, everyone calculating what happened next and whether they could live with it. Then a voice cut through the tension, amplified by radio speakers coming from the stairwell below. Agent Kane, stand down. This is General Nathaniel Graves. I'm invoking emergency national security protocols under presidential authorization. This building is now under military jurisdiction. Your agents are ordered to evacuate immediately. Kane didn't move. General, I need to see that authorization. It's classified. You don't have clearance. Then you don't have jurisdiction. Graves appeared in the stairwell flanked by 4 more operators. He wore combat fatigues instead of dress uniform, the star insignia on his collar the only indication of rank. He was 58, but moved like someone younger, comfortable with violence, familiar with command. His eyes swept the corridor and locked onto Meredith. Mrs. Blackwell, or should I say Iron Wolf, we meet again. Meredith stepped out from behind the nurse's station. No cover, no concealment, just her in scrubs facing down a general and 24 armed operators. I don't remember meeting you, General. I remember being on a rooftop that you demolished. I remember dragging survivors from rubble while you ordered us to shut up or face charges. But meeting Nelma, we've never met. Fallujah was unfortunate, Graves said, voice carrying the carefully rehearsed tone of someone who'd practiced this speech. But necessary. You witnessed classified operations. Operations that saved American lives. The collapse was enemy action that you survived, and I'm grateful for that. But the trauma seems to have created false memories, conspiracy theories that don't align with reality. Tyler Blackwood, Madison Whitmore, Jackson Thornhill, Derek Holloway. Meredith spoke each name like a verdict. 4 survivors from that rooftop, all dead in the last 8 months, all ruled accidents. That's not false memory, General. That's house cleaning. Graves's expression didn't change. I grieve for every soldier we lose, but accidents happen. Coincidence isn't conspiracy. And Corporal Drake, the man you tried to kill twice in this hospital, what's your explanation for that? Drake is a confused soldier suffering from combat stress. He believes he's carrying evidence of corruption, when in reality he's carrying classified documents he misinterpreted. We're here to recover those documents and get him the psychological help he clearly needs. It was masterful, Meredith had to admit. Every word carefully chosen to sound reasonable, to make her look paranoid, to frame this as mental health crisis instead of cover-up. If there weren't witnesses, if the FBI weren't recording this, it might have worked. Then you won't mind Agent Kane verifying those documents, she said. Kane doesn't have clearance. Convenient. Graves stepped forward, operators moving with him like extensions of his will. Mrs. Blackwell, this can end 2 ways. You and Drake come with us. Voluntarily, we debrief you. We determine there's been a misunderstanding, and you're released with no charges. Or you resist, we're forced to restrain you under military authority, and this becomes significantly more complicated for everyone involved. Third option, Wyatt called from his position down the corridor. You leave now, before every phone in this hospital finishes uploading video of a 3-star general threatening federal agents and conducting illegal military operations on civilian property. Graves looked past Meredith to Wyatt, and something flickered across his face. Not surprise, recognition. Corporal Drake, you should be dead. Twice over now, you're persistent. Learn from the best, sir. You taught me that sometimes the only way to complete the mission is to refuse to quit, no matter how bad the odds. I taught you to follow orders. You taught me to do what's right even when command tells me otherwise. The silence that followed was broken by a sound that made everyone tense. More boots on the stairs, more operators flooding into the corridor. The 6 had become 12, then 18, then more than could easily be counted in the dim emergency lighting. They weren't here to arrest anyone. They were here to overwhelm, to occupy, to make resistance impossible through sheer numbers. Kane spoke into his radio voice tight. All agents' defensive positions. Do not engage unless fired upon. Document everything. But even as he gave the order, Meredith could see the math. 8 people against what looked like 30-plus tactical operators. This wasn't a fight they could win with bullets. This was something else entirely. Graves gestured, and his operators began moving into formation, clearing corridors, securing positions. Not aggressive yet, but prepared. The message was clear. He owned this building now. He had the numbers, the training, the authority. Except he didn't have what mattered most. Meredith pulled out her phone, held it up so Graves could see the screen. On it, a live stream playing to 17,000 viewers and climbing. The view count increasing by hundreds every second. News outlets, social media, the footage Kane's agents had been recording and uploading in real time, showing everything. The power cut, the tactical team, Graves' threats, all of it public, all of it permanent. You wanted to make this disappear, Meredith said quietly. You wanted to classify it, bury it, make it go away like you've done with everything else. But you can't classify 17,000 witnesses. You can't bury footage that's already been downloaded and shared. And you can't make me disappear when this many people are watching you try. Graves stared at the phone, at the view count climbing past 20,000, at the comments scrolling past faster than anyone could read, people demanding answers, journalists asking questions, veterans expressing outrage. His face remained calm, but something behind his eyes shifted, the calculation changing. The mission parameters altered by a variable he hadn't accounted for. You think this protects you, he asked. You think publicity makes you safe? No, Meredith replied. I think it makes the truth safe, which is all that matters. Graves reached for his sidearm, and in that moment, everything crystallized. He was going to shoot her. On camera, in front of witnesses, in front of federal agents and streaming video, and thousands of people watching in real time. Because the alternative was worse. Because if she lived to testify, if the evidence she held became public record, his empire collapsed. His legacy destroyed. His freedom ended. The math was simple. Kill her now, face consequences later, but at least control the narrative. Or let her live and watch everything burn. His hand closed around the grip of his weapon, and Dr. Preston Hall stepped between them. The physician wasn't armed, wasn't trained, wasn't anything except a man in scrubs who'd taken an oath to protect life and meant it more than he'd ever meant anything before. General, Hall said, voice shaking but clear, you pull that weapon, you're not just killing a nurse. You're killing a witness, a federal investigation, and your own career. On camera, in front of 25,000 people. Is that really how you want this to end? Graves looked at Hall like he was seeing him for the first time. Seeing the cameras. Seeing the agents with their own phones recording. Seeing the impossible position he'd put himself in by coming here with overwhelming force, but no legal standing. Stand aside, doctor. No, sir, I won't. I'm ordering you. You're not my commanding officer. You have no authority in this hospital. And you're about to commit murder on live stream unless you make a different choice right now. The hand on the weapon loosened, not releasing but hesitating. Graves looked at Meredith past Hall's shoulder, and for the first time since entering the building, she saw something other than cold calculation in his eyes. She saw fear. This isn't over, he said quietly. Yes, Meredith replied. It is. You just don't know it yet. Graves gave a hand signal. His operators began withdrawing, moving back toward the stairwell in organized formation. The general himself was the last to leave, pausing at the threshold to deliver one final assessment. You think you've won. You've only delayed the inevitable. The people I work with, the systems I'm part of, they're bigger than both of us. You can expose me, destroy me, put me in prison, but the operation continues. The pipeline continues, and everyone who knows too much eventually disappears. Iron Wolf, it's just a matter of time. Then he was gone, boots echoing down the stairwell, tactical team vanishing like smoke. The silence they left behind was deafening. Kane immediately started issuing orders, coordinating with FBI teams outside to detain anyone they could to secure evidence to begin the process of building a case that couldn't be buried. His agents moved with renewed purpose, documenting everything, collecting shell casings that hadn't been fired but served as evidence of threat. Wyatt sagged against the wall, the harness holding, but his body finally admitting the cost of staying upright through combat readiness. Hall moved to stabilize him, checking vitals, adjusting the chest tube with practiced efficiency. And Meredith stood at the nurse's station phone, still in her hand, watching the view count climb past 40,000 as the live stream continued broadcasting the aftermath. People were already dissecting what they'd seen, demanding investigations, calling representatives, creating momentum that no classification order could stop. You did it, Kane said, appearing beside her. You forced him into a position where attacking you would destroy him worse than any testimony. That was brilliant. That was desperate, Meredith corrected. And it's not over. He's right about one thing. The people he works with won't stop because one general got exposed. This is bigger than Graves. Then we go bigger. FBI, DOD, Inspector General, congressional oversight. We turn this into the kind of investigation that can't be contained. How long will that take? Kane hesitated. Months, maybe years. People could die in that time, more loose ends, more accidents. What do you suggest? Meredith looked at the phone in her hand, at the thousands of people watching, waiting to see what happened next. At the power of publicity that had saved her life, but wasn't enough to end the threat permanently. I suggest we don't wait for the system to protect us. I suggest we make ourselves too valuable to kill. She looked at Kane. Every name in Madison's files, every transaction, every shell company, every contractor. We release it all. Public record. Total transparency. They can't erase what everyone already knows. That's classified information. Releasing it would be a federal crime. So is murder. So is weapons of trafficking. So is demolishing a building with U.S. soldiers inside. I'd rather face charges for exposing crimes than die quietly while they continue. Kane studied her for a long moment. You know I can't officially support that decision. I know. And you know that once you release classified information, you can't go back to being anonymous. You'll be visible for the rest of your life, a target, a symbol, a person who can never disappear again. Meredith thought about the last 7 years. The quiet invisibility of night shifts and dismissive colleagues and a life lived small enough that no one would notice. The safety of being nobody. She thought about Tyler, Madison, Jackson, Derek. 4 people who tried to stay invisible and died anyway. She thought about Wyatt bleeding in a hospital bed because someone decided his life was worth less than protecting a conspiracy. And she thought about Iron Wolf, the call sign she'd earned not through violence, but through the willingness to walk into fire to pull others out, through the refusal to leave anyone behind even when ordered to, through the understanding that some things mattered more than survival. Good, she said simply. I'm tired of hiding anyway. She pulled out her laptop, opened the files Madison had sent, added the documentation she'd kept from Fallujah Incorporated, Wyatt's evidence on the defense contracts. Everything. Every name, every date, every transaction that proved the conspiracy existed and reached into the highest levels of military command. She created a single compressed file, encrypted it with a password that would be released publicly, and uploaded it to 6 different platforms simultaneously with instructions for automatic distribution if she didn't check in every 24 hours. Then she posted the password. Public, irrevocable, permanent. Within minutes, the download started. Hundreds, then thousands, then tens of thousands of people accessing information that had been classified, protected, buried for over a decade. Journalists began dissecting it in real time. Whistleblower organizations started verifying sources. News outlets prepared breaking stories. The truth once released couldn't be contained. Kane watched the download counter climb with an expression that mixed horror and admiration. You just ended your chance at a normal life. I never had that anyway, Meredith replied. Normal died on a rooftop in Fallujah. This is just making it official. Part 4, the choice. 3 weeks had passed since the confrontation. 3 weeks of congressional hearings broadcast on every major network. 3 weeks of journalists dissecting files that Meredith had released, tracing connections that went deeper than anyone had imagined. 3 weeks of watching General Nathaniel Graves transform from decorated war hero to the face of military corruption on a scale that made previous scandals look like accounting errors. But 3 weeks wasn't enough time to dismantle an empire that had been built over 12 years. Meredith stood in the small apartment she'd rented after deciding her old place was too exposed, too easy to find. The new location was chosen for security, not comfort. 3rd floor walk-up, single entrance, clear sight lines from the windows. The habits of someone who'd learned that survival meant never getting too comfortable. Her phone buzzed with the 6th call of the morning. All from blocked numbers, all disconnecting when she answered. This harassment had started 2 days after she'd released the files. Death threats, legal threats, threats wrapped in official language from lawyers representing clients who wouldn't identify themselves. She'd forwarded everything to Kane, who'd forwarded it to FBI Protective Services, who'd offered her witness protection under a new identity in a new city far from Charleston. She'd declined. Running meant letting them win. Running meant admitting that truth only mattered when it was safe, and the moment it became dangerous, the smart choice was silence. She'd watched 4 friends die because they'd believed staying quiet would keep them safe. She wouldn't make the same mistake. The apartment door knocked with a pattern she recognized. 3 sharp raps paused, 2 more. Wyatt's signal. She checked the peephole anyway, confirming what she already knew before unlocking the deadbolt and chain. Wyatt entered carrying a duffel bag that clinked with the sound of equipment. He'd healed faster than the doctors predicted, the kind of recovery that came from a body that had been broken and rebuilt too many times to stay down for long. His chest still bore the marks where the chest tube had drained blood and fluid, but he moved without the careful hesitation of the injured. You look terrible, he said by way of greeting. Haven't been sleeping? Neither has anyone who's read those files. Wyatt set the duffel on her kitchen counter. DOD is conducting internal investigations on 47 officers. Defense contractors are lawyering up. Congressional oversight committees are scheduling hearings that'll run for months. You didn't just expose Graves, you pulled the thread that's unraveling the whole system. Good. Except the people at the top of that system are very motivated to stop the unraveling. Wyatt unzipped the duffel revealing communication equipment, encrypted phones, and a Glock 19 with 3 spare magazines. Kane sent this, said if you won't accept protective custody, at least accept protection. Meredith looked at the weapon with mixed feelings. She'd qualified expert marksman during her service, had carried a sidearm on every mission, had fired it in combat more times than she'd ever told anyone. But she'd also spent 7 years deliberately not touching guns, not being that person, not living in the world where violence was an acceptable solution to problems. I don't want to be armed in my own apartment. Then be unarmed and vulnerable. Your choice. Wyatt's voice carried no judgment, just the practical assessment of someone who'd learned that idealism didn't stop bullets. But understand that the people coming for you aren't going to be contractors you can sedative and pressure point into unconsciousness. They're going to be professionals with one job: make you disappear permanently. Kane said Graves is in custody, military detention. How is he still coordinating? Graves isn't coordinating anything. He's a caged animal waiting for trial. But the network he built, that's still operational. The officers he protected, the contractors he hired, the shell companies that moved money, none of that disappeared when he got arrested. Wyatt pulled out one of the encrypted phones. This is a direct line to Kane. You press one button, it alerts FBI Charleston PD and every federal marshal within 50 miles. Keep it on you, always. Meredith took the phone, feeling its weight. Such a small thing to represent the difference between life and death. You think they'll come here? I think they already have. 3 times according to the surveillance Kane set up. Different people each time. Watching patterns, learning routines. Building a profile so when they move, it's clean and fast and doesn't leave evidence. How long before they stop watching and start acting? Could be today, could be 3 months. Depends on how threatened they feel by the investigation. Wyatt moved to her window, checking sightlines with the automatic assessment of someone who'd learned to read terrain for tactical advantage. But Kane thinks it'll be soon. The longer this plays out in public, the more people start connecting dots. Better to eliminate the source before the investigation gains too much momentum. I'm not the only source. There are files, testimony, physical evidence. You're the face of it. You're the one reporters interview. You're the one Congress calls to testify. You're Iron Wolf, and that name carries weight that dry evidence doesn't. They can bury files, they can dispute testimony, but they can't make you disappear without everyone knowing exactly what it means. Meredith sat on the couch that had come with the furnished apartment, standard issue furniture, for people who didn't plan to stay long. So what's the play? I hide forever. I spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder. You do what you've been doing. You teach, you testify, you stay visible. But you also accept that visible means vulnerable, and vulnerable means prepared. Wyatt pulled something else from the duffel, a tactical vest, civilian style, designed to be worn under clothing. Level tie-dye soft armor, stops most handgun rounds. Won't help against rifles, but most urban assassinations use pistols. Quieter, easier to conceal. You want me to wear body armor to teach medical students? I want you to survive long enough that those students have someone to learn from. The apartment fell silent except for the ambient noise of Charleston outside. Cars, voices. The ordinary sounds of a city that didn't know one of its residents was living like a soldier in enemy territory. Meredith's phone buzzed again, not a blocked number this time, Kane's direct line. Blackwell, she answered. We have a problem. Kane's voice was tight, the tone of someone delivering bad news he wished he didn't have to share. Judge Harrington just ruled that half the evidence in the Graves case is inadmissible. Classified information obtained through unauthorized access. Fruit of the poison tree. That's not possible. The files were, stolen from classified databases using access codes you weren't authorized to have anymore. Graves' defense team argued that everything derived from those files is tainted, and Harrington agreed. Meredith felt something cold settle in her stomach. How much of the case does that affect? Almost all of it. Without the files, we have Wyatt's testimony about the defense contracts and your testimony about Fallujah. But both of those are circumstantial without the documentation to back them up. Harrington is saying we can't use illegally obtained evidence to prosecute no matter how damning it is. So Graves walks, not walks, But his lawyers are already talking plea deals, reduced charges, maybe 5 years instead of life, maybe administrative discharge instead of court-martial. Maybe, maybe he gets away with murder because the evidence proving it was obtained the wrong way. Meredith's voice was flat. That's what you're telling me? I'm telling you that the legal system has rules, and sometimes those rules protect the guilty. I'm sorry, Meredith. We're not done fighting this. There are other avenues, but I need you to understand that the case isn't what it was 3 weeks ago. She hung up without responding, sat staring at the phone in her hand like it was a foreign object she'd never seen before. Wyatt was watching her with the expression of someone who'd just witnessed something break that couldn't be easily repaired. What happened? The judge threw out the evidence. Graves is going to get a plea deal, 5 years maybe, maybe less. She looked up at him. We did everything right. We exposed him. We brought the truth to light. And he's still going to win. He's going to prison. That's not winning. 5 years for 12 years of weapons trafficking and 4 murders. That's close enough. Meredith stood pacing the small apartment like a caged animal. Tyler, Madison, Jackson, Derek. They died for nothing, because the evidence that proves why they died can't be used in court. It can be used in the court of public opinion. Everyone knows what Graves did. Public opinion doesn't put people in cells. It doesn't stop the pipeline. It doesn't protect the next person who stumbles onto classified corruption and becomes a loose end. She grabbed her jacket. I need air. Meredith, you can't just... I'm going for a walk around the block. I'll take the phone. I'll be careful. She was moving toward the door, needing to be anywhere except this apartment with its tactical gear and body armor and the constant reminder that she'd won the battle but was losing the war. Wyatt caught her arm, not restraining, just contact. Don't do anything stupid. Define stupid. Anything that involves confronting Graves or his lawyers or anyone connected to this case without federal supervision. Meredith met his eyes, saw the concern there and the understanding. The recognition that she was standing on a knife edge between doing what was smart and doing what felt necessary. I'm just going for a walk. Okay, but take this. He pressed the Glock into her hand, just in case walking turns into something else. She almost refused, almost handed it back and walked out unarmed because carrying a weapon meant accepting that violence was a possibility she needed to prepare for. But Wyatt's expression stopped her. The look of someone who'd seen too many people die because they'd prioritized principle over pragmatism. She took the gun, checked the chamber, holstered it at the small of her back under her jacket. Then she left before she could change her mind. Charleston in early afternoon was humid and bright, the kind of weather that made tourists happy and locals resigned. Meredith walked without destination, letting her feet choose direction, while her mind processed the reality that everything she'd sacrificed might not be enough. She'd given up anonymity, safety, the quiet life she'd built over 7 years. And for what? A reduced sentence for a man who'd ordered the deaths of at least 4 people, and probably more. A legal system that protected the guilty because the evidence proving their guilt had been obtained improperly. Her phone buzzed. Text message from an unknown number. You did your best. Sometimes the system fails. Sometimes the bad guys win. That's not your fault, but what happens next can be. Choose wisely. She stared at the message. No name, no indication who sent it. Just advice that felt like a warning wrapped in concern. Another message appeared before she could respond. Graves is being held at Fort Jackson military detention. Transport to federal court happens every Monday and Thursday for proceedings. Route is classified but predictable. 3-vehicle convoy, minimal security because nobody expects an attack on U.S. soil against a man already in custody. Meredith's grip tightened on the phone. This wasn't advice. This was an invitation. Someone was giving her the information she'd need to intercept Graves. To do something outside the legal system that the legal system couldn't accomplish. A third message. You're not the only person he destroyed. You're not the only one who wants justice. And you're not the only one who understands that sometimes justice and legality aren't the same thing. The choice is yours, but know that others are watching. Others are ready. All you have to do is say yes. She should call Kane. Should report this immediately as conspiracy to commit violence against a detained suspect. Should be the responsible person who trusted the system even when the system failed. Instead, she typed a single word. When the response came within seconds. Thursday, Route 17 near the Ashley River Bridge, 2:30 p.m. 3-vehicle convoy as described. Graves will be in the center vehicle. There will be 4 guards. Federal marshals, armed but not expecting resistance. You'll have maybe 90 seconds before backup arrives. Meredith deleted the messages, turned off her phone's location services, started walking back to her apartment with a purpose that hadn't been there when she'd left. Wyatt was still there when she returned, cleaning the Glock she'd taken with the methodical attention of someone who understood that weapons maintenance was the difference between functional tool and expensive paperweight. "You were gone 40 minutes, he said without looking up. "Long walk." I needed to think. "And what did your thinking conclude?" Meredith sat across from him, the kitchen table between them, like a negotiating surface. "That I'm tired of playing by rules that the other side ignores. That I'm tired of doing everything right and watching wrong people win because they have better lawyers. That I'm tired of being told that justice will prevail when I've watched it fail 4 times." Wyatt set down the cleaning rod. "What are you planning?" "Nothing yet, maybe nothing ever. But if I was planning something hypothetically, would you try to stop me?" "Depends what the something is." "Hypothetically, intercepting a prisoner transport, confronting Graves directly, getting a confession on record that can't be thrown out by a judge because it came from his own mouth." "That's not a hypothetical. That's kidnapping a federal prisoner and assaulting a military convoy. That's a federal crime that would put you in the cell next to Graves." Wyatt's voice was calm, stating facts without judgment. "Is it worth it? 4 dead friends, a weapons pipeline that's still operational, a general who'll serve 5 years and walk out with his pension intact." Meredith met his eyes. "You tell me if it's worth it." "I can't tell you that. Only you can make that call." Wyatt reassembled the Glock with practiced efficiency, each piece clicking into place with mechanical certainty. "But I can tell you what happens after. You intercept that convoy, you become a fugitive. FBI stops protecting you and starts hunting you. Every law enforcement agency in 3 states gets your photo. You lose the institute. You lose your credibility. You lose everything you've built. I lose that anyway if Graves walks on a plea deal and his network comes after me properly. At least this way I choose how it ends instead of waiting for them to choose for me." Silence stretched between them, heavy with implications neither wanted to voice directly. Finally, Wyatt slid the reassembled Glock across the table. "If you're going to do something stupid, at least do it with proper equipment. That vest I brought, wear it. This gun, keep it loaded. And this," he pulled a small device from his pocket that looked like a thumb drive, "is a recording device, military grade, picks up audio from 30 feet. If you're going to confront Graves, at least make sure whatever he says is documented." Meredith took the device. "You're not going to try to talk me out of this." "Would it work? No. Then I'm not going to waste breath on arguments that won't change your mind." Wyatt stood, moving toward the door. "But I am going to tell you that whatever you do, you don't do it alone. You need backup. You need someone watching your six. You need an exit strategy that doesn't end with you in handcuffs or worse. You volunteering, oh, I'm a federal witness in an ongoing investigation. I volunteer for this. I compromise the entire case against everyone connected to Graves." He paused at the door. "But I know people. SEALs who got out. People who understand that sometimes the mission requires operating outside official channels. People who remember what Iron Wolf did for them. I'm not asking anyone else to throw away their future for my vendetta. It's not your vendetta. It's justice that the courts can't deliver. And if you think you're the only person angry enough to risk everything for that, you haven't been paying attention to the veteran community." Wyatt opened the door. "I'll make some calls. See who's available Thursday afternoon. No promises. But Iron Wolf never operated alone before. No reason to start now." He left before Meredith could argue, the door closing with a finality that felt like crossing a threshold she couldn't uncross. She sat in her apartment, surrounded by tactical gear and encrypted phones, in the weight of a decision that would define everything that came after. The smart choice was obvious. Report the messages to Kane. Let the FBI handle it. Trust the system even when the system had already failed. But Meredith hadn't survived 2 combat tours and 12 years of living with classified secrets because she'd always made the smart choice. She'd survived because she'd made the necessary one. Thursday was 3 days away. 3 days to decide if she was willing to become the person those anonymous messages assumed she already was. 3 days to calculate if the cost of action was worth more than the cost of inaction. 3 days to determine if Iron Wolf would stay buried in civilian clothes and teaching positions, or if one more mission remained before retirement became permanent. She looked at the photo on her phone, the one from Fallujah she'd carried for 12 years. 8 faces smiling at a camera, unaware that half of them would be dead within minutes, and the rest would spend over a decade living with the weight of survival. Tyler, Madison, Jackson, Derek. Four names that had become four accidents, that had become four murders that justice system would never properly address. Her phone buzzed one final time. Thursday, Route 17, 2:30 p.m. The question isn't whether you'll come. The question is whether you'll come alone. Meredith deleted the message, turned off her phone completely, and began planning like the combat medic. She'd been trained to be the tactical operator. She'd spent years denying the person who understood that sometimes saving lives meant confronting the people who'd been taking them. The smart choice would have been to walk away, to let the system handle it however imperfectly, to trust that 5 years in prison was better than nothing, and accept that perfect justice was impossible. But Meredith hadn't become Iron Wolf by making smart choices. She'd earned that call sign by making necessary ones, by refusing to leave people behind even when ordered to, by understanding that sometimes the only way to protect the living was to honor the dead. Thursday was 3 days away, 3 days to prepare, 3 days to assemble what she needed, 3 days to transform from the person she'd been pretending to be back into the person she'd always been underneath. 3 days until Route 17, until the Ashley River Bridge. Until the moment when Meredith Blackwell would have to decide if she was still the person who walked away from fights or the person who'd once been willing to fight through hell to bring everyone home. Iron Wolf had never left anyone behind. Not in Fallujah, not in the hospital, and not now when four friends were dead and the man responsible was about to escape with a sentence that barely qualified as inconvenience. Part 5, The Reckoning. Thursday arrived with the weight of inevitability. Meredith woke at 5:00 a.m., dressed in layers that concealed the tactical vest Wyatt had given her. The Glock sat heavy at her waistband, unfamiliar, after 7 years of deliberately not being armed. The recording device was in her jacket pocket, a thumb-sized piece of technology that represented the difference between vigilante justice and documented truth. She'd made her choice 3 days ago. Now came the execution. Her phone buzzed. Text from unknown number 4 blocks south of the bridge. White panel van, keys under driver's mat, equipment inside. We'll be watching. No name, no explanation of who we were. Just the tools to do what the system couldn't. Meredith left her apartment at 1:45 p.m., walked 4 blocks, found the van exactly where promised. Inside, communications equipment, binoculars, a rifle she wouldn't touch because she wasn't here to kill anyone, just to get truth on record. At 2:15 p.m., she positioned the van on Route 17, half-mile south of Ashley River Bridge. Clear sightline, easy approach, the kind of position that any tactical operator would recognize as advantageous for observation, vulnerable for defense. She was making herself obvious, making herself the target instead of Graves. At 2:28 p.m., 3 black SUVs appeared. Federal convoy, Graves in the center vehicle visible through tinted windows. 4 marshals total, professional but not paranoid. Nobody expected an attack. Meredith stepped out of the van, stood in the middle of the road, arms raised, no weapon visible, just a woman in civilian clothes blocking a federal convoy. The vehicle stopped. Marshals emerged, hands on weapons but not drawn. "Ma'am, step aside. This is a federal transport." "I know who you're transporting," Meredith said, voice carrying, "and I know he's about to walk on a plea deal that makes a mockery of justice." The center vehicle's door opened. General Nathaniel Graves stepped out, still in civilian clothes, but carrying himself like he wore stars. His eyes met Meredith's with recognition that wasn't surprise. "Ms. Blackwell, I wondered when you'd do something stupid." "Not stupid, necessary." She pulled out the recording device, held it up. "You're going to tell me the truth, on record, about Fallujah, about Tyler, Madison, Jackson, Derek, about Wyatt, about all of it." Graves actually smiled. "Or what, you'll shoot me in front of federal marshals. That's not justice, that's murder. And you're not a murderer, Iron Wolf. You're a medic. You save lives." "I saved lives by stopping the people taking them." Meredith's hand moved toward her waistband. The marshals tensed. "But you're right. I'm not here to kill you. I'm here to give you a choice." "What choice?" "Tell the truth now on this recording and I walk away. The public gets justice even if the courts can't deliver it. Or refuse and I release evidence that will destroy everyone in your network. Not just you, everyone. Your partners, your handlers, the people protecting you from above." Graves's expression shifted. "You already released the files." "I released 60%. The rest names of senators, Pentagon officials. CIA handlers who authorized your pipeline. People so far up that prosecuting them would require political will nobody has. She met his eyes. But I will burn it all down if you don't give those 4 people the acknowledgement they deserve. Silence. The marshals looked at each other uncertain. This wasn't in their protocols. Graves studied her for a long moment. Then quietly, "You're willing to become a fugitive. Destroy your institute. Throw away everything you built for 4 dead soldiers. For the truth," Meredith's voice was steady, "because if I don't fight for it, who will?" Graves looked at the recording device, at the marshals, at the empty road that suddenly didn't feel as empty anymore. He was a general. He recognized tactical positions, and he recognized when he'd been outmaneuvered. "If I do this," he said slowly, "you walk away. No more investigations, no more releases, done. No, you do this, and I let the courts handle what they can handle. But the truth becomes public. People deserve to know what you did." Another long silence. Then Graves straightened and something shifted in his posture. Not surrender. Confession. Fallujah, November 2012. Your team witnessed a classified weapons transfer. I was running a pipeline selling American military technology to allied forces that we couldn't officially support. Black budget, no oversight. The rooftop your team was on had clear sightline to the exchange. You documented it, photographed it. That made you witnesses we couldn't afford. Meredith kept the recorder steady. So you collapsed the building. I gave the order. Demo charges on the support structure. Time to look like enemy mortar. Your team died because they saw something they shouldn't have. That's the truth. And the 4 survivors, Tyler, Madison, Jackson, Derek, Graves's jaw tightened. They died because they kept asking questions. Because 12 years later, they still knew enough to connect the dots if anyone started investigating. So yes, I ordered them eliminated. Accidents, suicides, overdoses, whatever looked natural. Wyatt Drake. Drake stumbled onto my current operation. Defense contracts, same pipeline, different decade. He had to be stopped. The attack on his position was my order. The hospital attempt was my order. All of it. The recorder captured everything. Graves' voice, his confession. The admission that 4 murders were ordered, that a rooftop was demolished, that the conspiracy went exactly as deep as Meredith had said. "Why?" Meredith asked quietly. "Why tell me this now?" Graves met her eyes. "Because you already know. Because the courts will protect me with technicalities. Because at least this way history knows what I did. And maybe," he paused, "maybe I'm tired of lying about it." Meredith turned off the recorder, stepped back. "Marshal, take him in, and note that this confession was voluntary. No coercion, no threats, just truth." The head marshal, who'd been listening to everything with growing horror, nodded slowly. "Ma'am, I need to ask you to come with us for statement. I'll be at the FBI field office in 2 hours. Agent Kane knows how to reach me." Meredith turned, walked back to the van, drove away before anyone could stop her. The recording was already uploading to secure servers. Cloud backup. Multiple locations. The truth preserved and distributed where it couldn't be destroyed. 2 months later, General Nathaniel Graves pled guilty to 17 counts. The voluntary confession on Route 17 had changed everything. His lawyers couldn't dispute his own words. The evidence that had been thrown out became corroborating detail rather than foundation. Life imprisonment without parole. 47 other officers took plea deals. The pipeline was dismantled. The shell companies dissolved. And the oversight reforms meant that similar operations would face scrutiny they'd never encountered before. Meredith testified before Congress one final time, played the recording, watched senators who'd been protecting Graves suddenly discover they'd never supported him, watched accountability flow upward in ways she hadn't believed possible. The Blackwell Combat Medicine Institute thrived, expanded. Dr. Hall's medical ethics course became mandatory for military transition programs. Wyatt's tactical perspective shaped how trauma medicine was taught across civilian hospitals. And Meredith taught, every day. 30 students became 60. 60 became hundreds over the years. Each one learning not just medicine, but the weight of moral choice, the cost of silence, the necessity of speaking truth even when systems failed. She stood at the window of the Institute's main building, watching a new class practice triage scenarios. Behind her on the wall, the photographs remained. Tyler, Madison, Jackson, Derek. Their memorial not in stone, but in the generations of medics who learned their names, their story, their sacrifice. Her phone buzzed. Message from Tyler's sister. Thank you, again, always. Meredith replied simply, he mattered. They all mattered. That's what I promised. She put the phone away and returned to the classroom. Students waiting, knowledge to pass on, a legacy built not on revenge, but on the refusal to let truth die with those who'd been killed for knowing it. Iron Wolf had never left anyone behind, and in the end that meant refusing to leave behind the truth itself. The war was over, not because she'd won every battle, but because she'd fought the one that mattered most. The battle to make sure silence didn't equal victory, that darkness didn't equal safety, that those who died for knowing too much weren't forgotten for the convenience of those who'd killed them. She taught that lesson every day, and every student who learned it became another guardian of memory, another voice against forgetting another person who understood that sometimes the most important medicine wasn't what healed bodies, it was what healed truth.